everyone. Welcome to another new episode of ESL Talk.
Welcome, everyone. We had really great feedback from our lesson last week with Kate on business English, and today will hopefully be just as useful.
And as always, I'm Faye.
And I'm Daniel.
So today we're talking about the journey of progressing from ESL student to ESL teacher and the steps, techniques, and strategies you may want to think about when you make that leap.
Yeah, our special guest, Jose, was sharing his journey with us from starting out as a student to making it as a professional ESL teacher today. It's really inspiring and encouraging to see more and more ESL students progress and become ESL teachers themselves. So Faye, I know we've talked a little bit about your journey before, but let's see if we can expand on this a little bit more to kick off today's episode. So you actually learned English, first of all, in Brazil. So what was that experience like for you?
Yeah, so it wasn't the most traditional way of learning English as a second language. I was born in Brazil and I learned English in kindergarten. I went to English immersion kindergarten. So it was almost like learning it as a first language, but it was my second language officially. And then after that, I just I kind of went school hopping. I went from school to school because what happened was my English was pretty advanced at a very early age. So whenever I got tested at just regular ESL schools, I got tested at a very high level, and I would usually be placed with adult learners, even as a child sometimes, because they didn't really have that level for my age. So I ended up hopping because sometimes they would place me in with the kids, but the English was too easy for me. And then I ended up studying usually with people that were much older than me. And it was mostly American English that we were exposed to until I decided to take one of the Cambridge exams, the advanced CAE at the time. That's when I started studying at a British English school. And
what
yeah,
was that
after
transition like from British English, American English? How did that feel?
It was kind of strange because at the time, the only contact I had with British English was through Spice Girls. That was it, because we didn't really have the internet like we do nowadays and TV shows and all that. It was mostly in Brazil, especially, it was mostly American influence. So it was a bit of an adaptation, and most of my teachers actually spoke with a British accent, and I had to kind of learn the vocabulary. I was happy to learn that I didn't have to speak with a British accent to take the exam. But it was interesting because after that, when I first started teaching, I actually started teaching a Cambridge prep course for FC, then CAE, and nowadays I teach for proficiency as well. So it really helped me in that sense. Yeah.
Absolutely. So how long would you say that it took you to feel confident enough in your ability to teach English?
I mean, I was about 15 when I, let's say, graduated from English, and I felt really confident in my ability to communicate and speak the language. When I started teaching, I mostly started teaching it because I wanted to make some money on the side as a university student. And I just said, oh, this is something I can do. Let's try and see how it goes. But I actually got hired by a school that taught business English as well in company, like for ExxonMobil employees. And I kind of got thrown in there because I taught more advanced levels. And I don't think I actually felt that confident at the time, but I was always a pretty good actress, I think. I could fake it.
Yeah.
And that really helped me trick myself into feeling confident as well. Yeah.
I see. Yeah, confidence is something that's really difficult to kind of master, even when you have all the knowledge and all the skills. I think just being in a new environment and being around new students, it takes some time to feel comfortable, and obviously for your students to feel comfortable too.
Exactly. Yeah, for me it was mostly that, and just kind of wanting to have some sort of work and with something I knew how to do. That's sort of made me become more confident. But what motivated you to become a teacher in that sense?
Yeah, I mean, I know I obviously had a very different journey, but my main motivation to become a teacher was probably just based on seeing the way that my teaching helps students, even if it's in a small way. I really loved that connection that I had with students and being able to help them to improve. And all students have different motivations, and to get to listen to those motivations and try to understand those motivations and try to help students to achieve their goals and keep them motivated is a real challenge. And teaching is really rewarding because it's not just, I'm
Mm-hmm.
telling you things and you're listening. It's kind of a little bit of sociology, a little bit of
Oh yeah.
psychology, a little bit
Mm-hmm.
of science, a little bit of, you know, math. It has so many different elements to it, which I think that's why I think so many of us love teaching, because it's
Mm-hmm.
varied, it's interesting,
Yeah.
it's challenging. You're always learning new things, and no two classes are really the same. Even if you're
Yeah.
teaching the same course, your students or you or your materials, you can always constantly adapt and change and transition and keep improving.
Right.
One thing that I tell and I kind of, share with so many teachers now is a lot of them tell me, especially at the moment, now we've kind of readjusted to this situation now, is kind of like, I'm not getting any students, or the
Mm-hmm.
students are not booking with me, or what's going on, why is the situation like this? And I always say, you try to use this as a positive. Use this time to work on your message, work on your
Mm-hmm.
social media, work on your approach, work on
Mm-hmm.
your profile, work on your courses and your material.
Yeah.
So I think it's because that it's so varied and challenging and also rewarding, and that's why I love what I do.
And did you ever consider teaching anything other than ESL?
Yeah. Before I was an English teacher, I actually was training to become a PE teacher, a physical education or a
Hmm.
sports
Oh,
teacher.
yeah, you mentioned that
I
before. Mm-hmm.
played a lot of soccer when I was young, or football. Apologies to those from other parts of the world. I coached, I managed, I played, just try to, because I thought that this would be something that I could really do, that I'd enjoy, that would be, a long-term career for me. But the more I got into actual in the classroom teaching, the more I enjoyed it.
Mm-hmm.
So it was there for a while until my early 20s. But then once I went to Korea and I started teaching English, I kind of knew that that's what I wanted to do, and to do professionally and do well.
Mm-hmm.
So not really, but how about you, Faye?
Yeah, ever since I was a little girl, my mom still makes fun of that. I used to play school. So I would teach my brother and my sister. I would make them be my students. I would give them homework and I would mark it. And I always like wanted to be a teacher, but growing up in Brazil, teachers are not um, the teaching profession is not that well respected in terms
Mm,
of how well valued it is and salary wise. And everyone says, yes, teachers are great, but then you don't actually see that in practice. And I I never really saw that as a viable career option if I ever wanted to make a certain amount of money or have a comfortable life. It didn't seem like I would be using my fullest potential in that field. So I went to design school, and that which seemed cool at the time, and it was pretty cool, but I really didn't feel like I could do that for a living. And then when I
mhm,
started teaching as something just to make some money and travel, and then I'm like, oh, actually I really love doing this and i'm
mhm.
i'm good at it. It's like I have fun, my students are learning. And it's that what you said, that you see your students learning, that immediate feedback that I didn't get from being a designer and working at the computer
Right.
and then presenting a client with something. They're like, nah, can we change the color a bit? And it's like, ah.
But I
So
guess you could apply that to teaching in quite a lot of ways now, in terms of that design
exactly.
background.
Absolutely. And the creativity that came with it, all the things
Mm,
that drew me to design, I could definitely use as a teacher.
yeah.
And so I always wanted to be a teacher, but I tried teaching. I mean, I've done teacher training, which I like as well. It's very similar. And I've taught Portuguese as a second language. So
Hmm.
only things related to languages, I guess. Yeah.
Okay. So when you started out, because obviously you were a student and you made that transition to a teacher.
Mhm.
So what kind of qualifications or experience were required of you when starting teaching in Brazil?
Not a lot. And I cannot really say what it's like nowadays because it's been 15 years since I started, but it was mostly, can you speak the language? Great, you're hired. If you're a native speaker, wow, they were definitely hired.
Hmm.
Um, and some schools had sort of like a test that you could take as a part of your application. Mostly it was a language test, or they wanted to know if you could explain a grammar point. But a lot of schools actually had like a translation test, and those were the schools I kind of ran away from when I
Hmm.
realized that's what they were testing me on. I'm like, I'm not applying to be a translator. I want to teach, right?
Right, right.
I was lucky enough to get hired by a school that actually provided some teacher training as part of the hiring process. There was like a 3-day training. but it was better than nothing. But there wasn't really much. I did have my CAE certificate at the time, which I think was a plus, but it was definitely not a requirement. Yeah.
I see.
Yeah. And now, speaking of that, like I definitely noticed that working in Brazil, that being able to speak the language fluently, or even being a native speaker, definitely got you in the door quicker.
Hmm.
Do you feel you were treated the same as non-native teachers when you were starting out?
Absolutely not. No.
Mm,
And I've always been quite vocal about this when I've talked about this topic previously, but
hmm
I don't feel that I was. And if that's due to my gender or my nationality or my
hmm
age or my ethnicity, those all could have been factors. And again, I don't know which one or which combination of those may have helped me.
hmm
But I feel as if, let's say because I'm a male, because I'm white, because I'm, British, because I have native proficiency, that gave me advantage over
hmm
others, or advantages over others. And that kind of manifested in different ways.
Yeah.
In Korea, that was, it was seen as if the program that I worked at, it was kind of everyone was equal in terms of
hmm
we're all, applying to do the same job and we're all having the same contract and the same conditions. But
hmm
then maybe once you're actually working in your school, or you're living in a certain environment, and maybe locals or students or co-workers are not used to seeing someone who looks like you or sounds like you, or they just haven't had that experience. So that has led to a lot of issues for a lot of my colleagues and friends and people that I know, but not so much for me. So I think things are changing in a lot of places. Again, I can't speak for all countries, but I feel like I've been very sheltered in a lot of ways, and a lot of discrimination or issues that others have faced has been kind of has not happened to me, or I've avoided. But that isn't to say that I have been discriminated against because I was the only foreigner in my school. I was the only non-Korean in my school. So of course, there's a different kind of discrimination. But I think in comparison to others that I know, it's very small, and it's very, it's very insignificant, really.
Yeah, yeah, it's unfortunate because I definitely noticed that in Brazil. I had coworkers who were native speakers of English, and I had coworkers who weren't. And often my coworkers that had maybe a bit more of a Portuguese accent while speaking English would definitely not get the same opportunities like to teach the higher levels. They were amazing teachers, people that really helped me become better teachers, that guided me, who I looked up
Mhm.
to. But often I could see something was preventing them from moving up or getting more challenging teaching opportunities. And it was definitely not their ability.
Yeah,
It was not, I
and
mean, not their teaching skills. It was because they couldn't pass for a native speaker. I was always fortunate that I sounded the part, that my accent was always pretty
mm,
close to native like, and a lot of people congratulated me on that. It wasn't really a merit of mine, and I
yeah,
don't think that's something that I should be congratulated on. um,
no.
but it's unfortunate that that's the way it still is, I
It
think.
is. And I think every school or every university, for example, you need a mix. You need a blend of
Hmm
both of those. And for students, if they
hmm
can listen to different types of English, different accents, different vocabulary uses,
hmm
different styles, that's a real benefit. And I think
yeah
the sooner we get away from this, you know, you kind of put it up on this pedestal of
yeah
native like proficiency, but what does that really mean?
yeah exactly, that's exactly it.
I've met so many native speakers who
hmm
really struggle to communicate well in English. But
hmm
on the flip
or
side, I've
made
met,
make grammar mistakes all the time,
yeah, and
and
I've
yeah.
met many non-natives who can understand and speak and teach the language much better than a lot of native speakers.
Yeah,
I still,
exactly.
I'm constantly shaking my head when I see comments or, responses to things online where people can't use the word lose and loose or there
Or
and
should
there.
have,
And
should
just,
have.
I see it all the time. And I just
Yeah,
think some of these people have the audacity to call out others for their language use when
yeah,
we can't use it ourselves. So
yeah,
it's
exactly.
it's a real frustration, and it does kind of, it's kind of a pet peeve of mine, but
Yeah, mine too. Yeah. And
yeah.
I always tell my students, especially like in class when they're practicing with each other and they're like, oh, I don't understand her accent. Like,
Mhm.
I want to speak with the native speakers. I'm like, if you're in Vancouver, if you go to Tim Hortons, if you go to Starbucks, if you go
Right.
to any restaurant, anywhere you go in the service industry, 90% of the time, the person talking to you is not from here.
Hmm.
They'll have accents from different parts of Canada, different parts of the world. There'll be second language speakers. And what are
Yep.
you going to do? Oh, I don't want to talk to you because
Right.
you're
And
not a
that's not
native
just
speaker.
that's not just the case in Canada. That's in the UK. That's in the US.
Hmm.
That's in Australia, for
Yeah.
the majority of the situation. So
Yeah.
yeah, I really agree with you, and I think that's a
Hmm.
really good message that we need to push to our learners and to our fellow teachers as well.
Definitely.
So in terms of moving to Canada and making that transition, Faye, did you feel a lot of pressure moving into that
Mm.
environment based on what we just talked about?
A lot of personal pressure that I put on myself.
Mm.
I mean, before coming here, I had to take the IELTS test for immigration, and I think I got like an 8.5 because I didn't really want to study that much, and I was too
Hmm.
lazy to practice the writing much because the format is very
But
specific. We've
that's
talked
that's
about
better
this
than most
before.
native speakers. So
Yeah.
yeah.
And then, but for me, that wasn't enough. Because I knew coming here, I knew I wanted to find a teaching job. And I felt like I had to prove myself because I was going to be competing with native speakers, with Canadians, right?
Mhm.
I decided to take the proficiency exam, the Cambridge proficiency exam. And I told myself I could get no less than an A. And I worked really hard and I got my A. I got my certificate. I was really proud and happy when I got here. My first interview, my boss, later my boss, didn't even care. I told him I had the Cambridge, and then I kind of found a way to mention it was an A that I got. And he's like, "Yeah, yeah, okay, fine." Like it wasn't a thing. So all he wanted was for me to do a teaching certificate because that's what the requirement is in Canada. It's like,
Mhm.
yeah, and they had it at the school, and I was teaching Portuguese there at the time. And he's like, "Oh, but you can pay like the staff fee, so it's a lot cheaper. Do it as soon as you're done, you're hired." And then when I started working there, I realized that about 50% of the teaching staff were not Canadian. They were second
Mhm.
language speakers.
Mhm.
And I'm like, oh, this is kind of cool. And then I realized that that's just the way it is here. People don't expect you to be a native speaker. They don't think that that's any better. But I was putting that pressure on myself, and I always felt like I had something to prove. But I definitely didn't feel that in the job market here, luckily. But I know that it's different in other countries. I find that in countries where English is not the first language, schools are more picky about that.
Mhm.
They want the native teacher, even though they themselves are not native speakers, right? And
Do you think it's a status or a kind of
definitely,
yeah, you think it's what it
definitely.
is?
I even noticed sometimes, like, because in Brazil, I felt a lot of pressure sometimes from family or even friends to maybe buy and have my own school one day. Being an ESL teacher was never going to be enough in Brazil.
Hmm.
But once I moved here, a lot of my friends and family back home are like, "Oh yeah, she teaches English in Canada." So now,
So they're
because I
emphasizing on
am
the in Canada
in
part,
Canada, because I'm a teacher in
right?
Canada now, the status is
In their
different.
mind, you've kind of made it, so to
I've made
speak.
it.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
see. I
for
see.
sure. Yeah.
Wow. It's really interesting to hear that. It's a lot of information I actually didn't know. So I've learned
Hmm.
a lot. Do you know a lot of teachers who've also made that transition from student to teacher?
Yeah, I know a lot in Brazil. A lot of my coworkers, most of my coworkers were first language speakers, and I think that there were lots of different because the like I said, there weren't really any requirements. There were a lot of different stories, which was interesting. Some people like me that just kind of learned the language as a child and naturally, and then traveled. Some people that had done like exchange in high school abroad, and then they went back and were completely fluent. Some people actually went to university to be English teachers. So I'm really curious to see what our guest story is like today, because I think
Yeah.
that'll be very interesting to compare and to see how that went. So Daniel, first, I'd love to talk a little bit about this episode's sponsor, Piecemeal.
Yes, we are really excited to talk about this platform made especially for teachers. It's ideal for creating drip courses that can be sent daily to your students as a text message. And as we all know, language is best learned one piece at a time. That's what Piecemeal does so naturally.
Yeah, and that's one of the best features for me. There's just no need to download an app or anything like that. You just choose what you want your student to get every day, like a picture, it could be a short video, or even a text message with some learning content, and send it out. It's as simple as that.
I actually think this is a great way for teachers who want to provide drip content in a simple and straightforward way.
Mhm.
I also really like that you can use it as a clever way to deliver bite-sized courses called a series, or you can start what's called a soapbox, where students can subscribe to get regular content from you as long as they want.
I actually recently signed up for Piecemeal and I'm really excited to start using it. I think it's an easy way for teachers who want to start building their own online courses but don't quite know how to get started. And it's also a very flexible tool for more seasoned teachers like you or me who want to give their students a different option for learning, or even for teachers who want to supplement their courses or offerings.
Yeah, and the best part about this is that there's actually zero commitment on your part. Piecemeal only charges a fee when you do, through a small commission from each sale that you make.
Right. So to get started, make sure you go to piecemeal.com. That is PIECEMEAL.com and get started for free.
Great. So now let's hear from our special guest today, Jose, who will share with us his journey of progressing from an ESL student to an ESL teacher. All right, let's welcome our special guest today, Jose. Hello, Jose. Welcome to the podcast.
Hello, guys. How are
Hi.
you?
Doing
Good. We're
good, thank
excited
you.
to have you here.
Yeah,
Oh, me
absolutely.
too. I'm so happy.
So, Jose, let's start by telling us a little bit about your journey as an ESL student to an ESL teacher. So, what was your journey like, Jose?
It all started when I was a child, and my older brother asked me if I was able to understand a song after having just sing it. At that moment, it was when I fell in love with the language. Then, after finishing secondary school and coming back from my gap year, I decided to study Portuguese and ended up enrolling into English pedagogy. And since then, I have been studying. That was when I was living in Argentina, but then I moved to Chile. And naively, I thought that I could transfer my credits, which was not the case. So I had to enroll again and go back from first year. And in January of 2021, after the whole hectic year of COVID and everything, I finished my major in English pedagogy, which translates into TEFL, which lasted 4 years. And as a former teacher, I have been teaching for 2 months already.
That's nice. It's nice to have someone who's like fresh off of that transition as well, because you've been working towards this for a long time, and now you're kind of just getting started, which is nice. And now, speaking of your ESL life as a student, what skills do you think it takes to be a successful learner?
There are many, but if I have to list my top 3, I would say motivation, since there will be days where it's going to be hard. As you advance in the language, structures are going to make you doubt, and you'll be like, oh, this is complicated. Then comes dedication. Learning a new language, whether it is English, Portuguese, Japanese, or the one that you are studying, requires to actually sit at your desk and study. Because most people think that if you go to an English institute and take an hour lesson, that's all, but that's not the reality. It is true that you can pick some bits and bobs from series, music, movies, but grammar requires time and practice. And here's what I tell my students, that besides the hour they spend with me, they need to immerse themselves into the language. And last, it would be organization. Since you have other things, suppose that you are still at school and you need to be able to balance your other subjects and the new language that you are learning. The same happens even if you're an adult working as an engineer. You need to work to be able to balance work and study.
That's a lot of great advice. Yeah,
that really is. And a lot of times, I know, Faye, you probably get asked as much as I do, how can I be good at English? How can I improve my English? And
fast.
Jose has just laid it out perfectly. If you don't have that immersion and you don't take every opportunity to practice and, try to learn from your mistakes, then it's going to be a much slower process. So thinking about those skills, Jose, how does that translate to teaching? Knowing these skills that you need to be a good student, how does this translate to teaching, or are there some different skills that we need?
Actually, I think that most of them are the same. Not only do you motivate yourself, but also your students. And here's when it comes into play intrinsic and extrinsic motivation,
Mm.
especially with young learners. With them, you need to have a plan B, C, and even go to Z. Because when you are teaching and you realize that they are not so happy with the content, you need to have another activity with the same content. I found myself, for example, teaching how to tell the time, and we were playing with the clock, and the students weren't happy, but I used the same activity into a space race, and they participated and were happy with the activity. Dedication is still in the game. You need to keep yourself updated in the latest education law and methodology, and you also need to be organized in order to lesson plan and assess. And if you are teaching at a school, I guess with all the administrative things, it is important too, because from what I heard, it's a lot. But I would like to add one more here, because I like to think that mindset, it is important, since it will be useful not only for you, but also for your students. We need to be able to enjoy silence and not be afraid of it, make it our friend. Switch our students' mindset. Instead of looking negatively at the test and exercises result, tell them that, for example, hey, you did 68 this class when last class was only 30%. You are learning. It's slow, not like as fast as you would like to, but you are learning. Have fun with the process. That is what I can say, at least from my context, because I teach at an online institute, and most of my students are here for reinforcement.
That's great. It's funny because your answer almost seems like a summary of a lot of our previous episodes. Like the idea of mindset, and also of like always keeping motivated, making things very positive, showing students why they're learning and how much they're learning and all that. That's great insight, actually.
It is. It's a great reminder as well that we need to constantly remind students it's not about the destination, it's about the journey. And if you can, stop and appreciate all those different stops on the journey, then the destination will, it'll be worthwhile. You'll get there before you realize it. And I think it's really useful that you've brought that up, Jose, and teachers need to know that, if we're showing students why we're doing things and they're seeing the value of that, then that's really important as well.
Yeah, that's great. Now, what do you think are you talked about the similarities in terms of the skills, but what do you think are the main differences between being a student and a teacher of ESL?
I guess that the most important thing is that you are not just in charge of yourself, but your students too. When I was a student and it was raining, I could choose to stay at home and keep sleeping. Now I can't.
Right.
Then I am not sure if this happens to you, but since I started teaching, it seems that everything can be turned into a lesson. I don't know why, but I found myself in the middle of a series thinking, oh, I could use this to teach present simple, or that could be used to teach as a function. That could work as a function. And also the responsibility you have. You are now the person in charge of those students' learning process. And on the other hand, I can tell you one thing that has not changed. You still need to be an early bird.
That's true. That is true. I really like what you said there too, about like just kind of seeing teaching moments in everything, or teachable moments in everything. I remember when I started out, you just took me back. And I remember like listening to music or watching TV. I'm like, oh, I'm teaching present perfect next week, and this song is perfect. And it's funny because, and you feel like you almost get overwhelmed by all these ideas early on. So that's really nice. Yeah, that you feel the same way.
Yeah, I like that too. And I think in the past, I've kind of seen things or heard things. I'm like, this would be great for a lesson. I think we once taught a class on similes using a Katy Perry song, which was, again, pretty strange, but it definitely has that hook. And if you can get students involved, then that's even better. So for you, Jose, as a former ESL student turned teacher, what advantages do you have as opposed to maybe someone like me who hasn't been through that same journey as you?
Well, I have always been a firm believer of experience. So as a former student, I can understand their struggle. I mean, I have suffered while learning the irregular verb list or double consonant where it was not supposed to, or even mispronounced some words. So I have this, which I like to call tips. And I can tell them, hey, if the instruction says write the following affirmative sentence into present continuous, and present continuous into an interrogative sentence, just move the verb to be to the beginning of the sentence and then copy the rest of the sentence and add the question mark at the end. And that's all. And they're like, oh, that's easy. And then I can sympathize with them. I have gone through the same situations. If not, I know someone who had. Sorry.
Yeah, that's true. So what you just showed me there is that I've had that exact same situation as you, and I've explained it a different way. So for you as a learner, you have a much easier way to explain how to solve that problem. Whereas for me, I can see that, but I can't explain it as well as you because I haven't gone through that process. So it's really interesting to see that.
It's something you probably hadn't thought about, right? As like a native speaker, when somebody asks you a question, you're like, yeah, I know that that's the way it is, but why, and how can I make it simple? It is something that I've seen a lot of my trainees who were first language speakers of English struggle, especially with grammar lessons, because they couldn't simplify it. And often they didn't realize they had to. They would come into the classroom for the first time and like, oh yeah, I got this. And as soon as students started asking questions, they're like, oh, hold on. Oh, I'm just making them more confused. And then, so yeah, that's definitely an advantage as a second language speaker of the language. Now, what advice would you give to other ESL students who want to become teachers eventually?
I guess I have to separate here into two types. If you're at university level, I would say observe and pay attention to your teachers, not only to the content they teach, but also to how they do it, how they monitor, how they assess. I used to take notes of every little details in class, not content, but like things like, oh, he noticed that he noticed a change in the student's pace, so he changed the activity and turned it into a more kinesthetic one. And with that motivation changed, be willing to take your own learning path to the next level. There are things that you will not be taught in details, like how to teach online, for example, or how to create certain activities. So you need to look for more information. I remember that in my last year, I knew that I would have to teach. I would have to do my professional teaching practice. So I had to prepare myself to be able to do it online because we were in the COVID situation. So I took some webinars, watched hours and hours of YouTube videos on how to use Zoom, how to use Nearpod, how to use Pear Deck, and other sites that will be useful for my activities. Then if you're a student, a regular student at school or at an institute, and you want to become a teacher, pay attention to your teacher, ask questions. At university, the English is different. It is not like this is the verb to be, and if they teach you the verb to be, it will be just a 15-minute lesson, and then they're going to move on. You have your entire day in English, and you will see topics that you've never had before, like phonetics and phonology. You will have sentences analysis. You will see syntax and morphology, and you are like, oh, this is completely different to the things that I saw in school. And the most important thing is that you need to understand your own language and be able to understand the different, to be able to understand actually a different one. I remember that Spanish as a subject at university was half a sum. And if you're not able to understand your own language, imagine when your professor asks you to analyze a verb or a noun in detail and describe it. But above all, I'll say that have fun while learning. Enjoy the process. Make mistakes. They're part of the learning process. I like to tell my students that if you're not in a test, you can make as many mistakes as you want. It won't matter because you're still learning. And actually, I'm not grading you for the mistakes. They're part of the learning process. So in the end, there isn't anything more satisfying than listening or reading something and being able to understand it. You're like, oh, this is wonderful. I'm learning.
That's great. Yeah, that's good advice for a lot of the people that are just starting out as teachers in any situation.
I think it can be very intimidating as well. And a lot of people who want to become teachers, they think, well, I can never be as good as this person, or I'll never be the same as this person. So where do you think, Jose, that new potential teachers could go to get started? Where could they go to maybe, find those first jobs or find those resources or materials to get started?
If you're in Chile, there are two ways. In the private institution or school, you have to do it the old way, send your resume to the institution and to the openings. And that also you think that will fit your prospect, because if I like to say that if they like to pick their teachers, you should also be able to pick the institution that you would like to work.
True. Mm-hmm.
I remember that I created my LinkedIn profile and other sites where this institution would post their openings and check them every day. So if I saw one, I would send my resume until I got an email from the one that I'm working at the moment.
Nice. Okay.
And then there's the other side, the public institution. That is a different story. Depending on your region, you have an organization that controls all the hirings. I mean, you upload your information or your resume into the system, and when there is an opening, they call you, and you decide either to reject that opening, that proposal, or move on with the process. And here's something that I like to add that I found out, and I wish that someone told me before, that you need to be aware of some openings. Some of them are really fishy. For instance, I have applied to one institute, one with a household name. The offer said that they were looking for teachers and offered this and that, but at the interview, it wasn't that. They told me that they were going to hire me as a language assistant and pay me like one, but they needed someone with a degree, with a teaching degree, to cover the days their teachers couldn't do it. And I was like, no, that's not for me, because I wanted to work as a teacher, not as an assistant.
Yeah.
So it's the old bait and switch. It's the promise this, but actually it's not this. That's very common, especially in international settings. I know, if you want to teach ESL, especially in another country, there is a lot of this that happens. So yeah, that's really good advice to just be aware and check and ask questions. Jose, when it comes to online teaching, where are some places where potential new teachers could start? Are you aware of any online schools or online platforms that might work?
Actually, I'm not pretty sure, because the one that I work at, it's from the city that I live in. It's called English BV, and they had a sort of a house, a place where to teach, but since this COVID situation happened, they moved everything to an online base.
Yeah.
And so they work with students from the different institutions that we have around town or some other places, because I have students from all around Chile, actually.
Wow, it's wonderful.
Well, I think what you mentioned as well about LinkedIn is something that is interesting to point out, because when I started teaching, LinkedIn wasn't a thing. I don't mean to date myself here, but it was a while ago, and there wasn't even Facebook. So that wasn't an option. But I think that could be definitely something that new teachers could look into, just really create a very strong LinkedIn profile. And the good thing about it is that people can review the jobs as well, right? And you can, like you said, pick and choose more easily and make sure that you are actually going for a job in an institution that you would be proud to be working at. I had the same situation when I started out teaching, and I remember I was talking to a friend of mine who was a teacher already at the time, and she said, "Oh, I wouldn't apply for this in this school because they'll actually taint your resume. If you work for them, other schools won't want to hire you because of their teaching style, and it's not really up to date." So I think that's an important point to keep in mind. You should be able to choose your job as much as they should be able to choose you. I like what you said. Yeah.
Yeah. And another thing that I found, at least here, is that every English teacher knows themselves. It's sort of like a system. Like, I guess in one of your postcards, you mentioned having this sort of web of English teachers. So I remember when I had my interview, my boss told me that she asked someone else about me. And that person told her, like, I don't remember about hearing about him, but I know someone who has worked with him. And so that's where the referral came.
Yeah, that's good. It's always keep that in mind, right? That the people people you work with will become your references later. That's true. Yeah.
Great. So Jose, finally, what's next for you? What do you see as, the goals, or what's going to happen in the next couple of years in your mind in terms of your teaching journey?
Before university and before actually hearing your postcard and everything, I didn't know about Celta and Delta. So I would like to prepare for that. At university, we get a degree, and here you go for a postgraduate, and then you go for a master and everything. But I didn't know about the English certification system. I did my TKT at school, but then I started researching more about teaching English, what I need to do to be a better teacher. So I had to prepare for my CELTA, my Delta. I would like to do that and see how it goes.
That's
Wonderful.
good. That's a good
Yeah,
point.
that's great. Jose, thank you so much for taking time today to talk through your journey from ESL student to teacher. And it's really inspirational. And I'm sure you'll motivate a lot of our listeners too. So thank you so much for taking the time to share that with us today.
Thanks for having me, guys. It was wonderful.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jose, for taking us through your journey from ESL student to ESL teacher. It's a really inspirational story, and hopefully it's motivating for our listeners too.
Yes, and as always, remember to subscribe for new episodes every Wednesday. Find us on Instagram at ESL Talk Podcast, or send us an email to esltalkpodcast@gmail.com.
Yeah, you can also find us on Instagram too, at I'm Daniel Teacher.
And at Learning with Faye, FEY.
All right, another great episode in the books. Thanks everyone for listening.
And be sure to tune in next week for another brand new episode.